Hi, everybody, and welcome to Pellegrino Walk. My name is Kevin Sisti, and this is my wife, Barbara.
Hello.
And we have a special episode today.
Right.
We're going to talk about that a little bit right now.
Yeah. This is a very sensitive topic for lots of reasons, and we want to handle it appropriately. And we have been approached by several people that were part of Dean Briggs, one and only church plant that we know of. It's called Alliance Christian Fellowship. It's in Bolivar, Missouri, and apparently, back in the early 2000s, Dean was a pastor there.
One of three pastors, I believe, on staff. We have been approached by, a few people, and one person in particular has wanted to come forward with her story. And what a courageous story it is, right?
Right. And so we've talked to her at length. We wanted to make sure, due diligence wise, our first priority is her mental health and
Absolutely.
state of being. She's a brilliant woman who loves the Lord and is a Bible teacher, and she's also a worship leader, very accomplished. Her husband is a pastor as well. And so her name is Valerie Evans. And after talking to her multiple times and communicating, she is bravely coming forward with her story because she wants to get the word out, warn people, and it's her story with the NAR, but specifically with Dean Briggs, how it impacted her and his character.
Yeah, and what you'll see in her story is obviously abuse, but authoritarian control.
Valerie courageously tells her story, not just what happened while she was part of that fellowship, but how she was forced to leave that fellowship when she pushed back.
As you know, as a part of our story, we've been talking about men that we've been around, the Great Communion Revival, Dean Briggs. We were intercessors for Dean Briggs. We were part of IHOP KC when the scandal broke there. And so this story is dear to our hearts too, because it tells us more, and it colors in more of maybe theologies that we've been talking about lately.
Right.
And this just gives a little more clarity to the picture that we've been trying to paint.
Well, and not just the theologies, though those are critical, also the character behind.
Very true.
When people are writing things about nobility and being truthful and being humble, and their fruit shows the exact opposite. It is imperative that we point this out and call for a reconciliation of the fruit and the words. I think they need to match.
Without any further ado, let's introduce to you Valerie Evans and an interview that we did with her. So, good morning, Valerie, and thank you so much for reaching out to us like you have and telling us your story. We are just so grateful for your stand and certainly your boldness in coming forth and wanting to share your story today. I think it's going to help so many out there. And like I said, we're so grateful for that. And we're just going to let you tell your story today as it is, and try not to interrupt you. If we do, it'll be for clarification along the way. But yeah, if you could tell the story that you told us, we think it's going to be so helpful to so many.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, you guys. It's been a joy meeting you and getting to talk with you and kind of see some of the things you guys are doing. So I appreciate you. So yeah, my name is Valerie, and I reached out to you. I don't even know if you've said all of this, but I had just randomly one day, actually, it's not random. with some of the things going on YouTube,
Mhm.
I had just kind of been following along a little bit with some of those the stories coming out of Bethel and Mike Winger's videos, and because I
Okay.
used to be in that world,
Mm.
several years ago, and so it caught my attention just because I thought, oh, I know these people. I resonate with the stories of these people coming out of that and some of those victims, and so I had just kind of Googled one day a name just to see if this name came up on YouTube, and lo and behold, I found you
It
two.
did.
You found us.
I found you and some of the videos that you were doing, and gosh, yeah, that kind of brought a whole lot of things for me rushing back a little bit, just memories and thoughts and experiences, and so that was my reason for reaching out, was just to in some way hearing what you were saying and just wanting to say, hey, you're on the right track, you
Okay.
guys are seeing this well, kind of a bit of a even just confirmation to you all of what you were doing, plus and even just your own experiences, that sometimes it's good to have someone come along and say, you're not crazy, this is
Right.
Absolutely.
We do need
happened to
We
me
do need
too.
that. Yeah.
I do too. So that's
It's
that's
real.
kind of, it did the same thing for me in seeing your posts. So obviously the post that came up when I Googled was your series that you did on Dean Briggs,
Okay.
Mhm.
that you all knew from um, Kansas City's House of Prayer.
Mhm.
And so I watched all of that and commented just because I wanted to say, hey, I um, I knew him. It feels like a lifetime ago.
Mm.
Right. Right.
So, but also have my own story of um, just walking, of him. He was a pastor at the time, so have my own story, my own experience with him. But I want to start a little bit with the offset of, this really isn't a story about Dean. For
Mm.
me, this is a story of God's deliverance and his hand on my life and restoration, and showing me that he's bigger than any pastor, any minister out there, that uh, he can bring us through and restore broken faith.
Amen.
Amen.
And to
That's
Amen.
me,
great.
that's what this story is about. So,
Mm.
and that's why I want to share this,
Mm.
not because I want to, um, I don't know, take someone down. I
Right.
really
Right.
want to lift up what God does to broken people and to his children that have been wounded. So that's my heart behind being here
Amen.
and
Oh,
wanting
thank you
to
for that.
reach out
Yeah.
to you all. So
Thank you.
Wow.
yeah. So I'll get started. um, for me, it started in actually September of 1999, so a long time ago.
Okay.
Mhm.
I had just transferred from a university in Kansas and transferred down to a little Baptist college in Bolivar, Missouri. And while I was there, I started attending a little church called Alliance Christian Fellowship. And it was planted by three friends that had graduated from SBU um, at some point. And it was mostly, from what I could tell when I first got there, it wasn't your typical Baptist church, which was what I had kind of come out of, um, and what I was kind of used to. It wasn't the typical. It kind of was exploring these ideas of really just kind of some charismatic doctrine, and what does it mean to operate in the the more fantastical gifts of the spirit, and this
Mhm.
idea of fivefold ministry and all of those things. So brand new words to me at that time, brand new concepts. But that was kind of what it was. It was a tiny, I think my first Sunday going, there were 30 people there. It was tiny. Um, anyway, and I remember showing up at this church and it felt like home to me. The people were so sweet. It consisted mostly of two two couples, two married couples, one of them being Dean and his wife, and another one being another pastor and his wife, and then another pastor. There were three of them, um, and he was there, and then mostly young college women. There weren't a lot of men at the time, so but that was mostly who was there. But it was a really sweet, close knit group of people, very kind, all very passionate for the Lord. And was a lot of the driving, I think, behind that is we all wanted to know the Lord and to love Him well. And so that was, my first impression of being there. Um, After a few months of being there, I joined the worship band. I grew up doing music, being part of worship teams all through high school and in college. So I started first, I was singing, and then eventually I learned how to play the bass guitar because we needed a bass guitarist. So I was like, well,
Why
it's
not?
just plucking one string at a time. I can do that. So
I love that.
yeah, so I did that for a while. And then I also was introduced to intercessory prayer. And
Mhm.
so I joined the intercessors group, um, started having some experiences with what they called deliverance prayer, deliverance ministry. Um, I don't know how mu I I've been out of this world for so long, I'm not even sure what people know and don't know about that. My understanding at the time was it was prayer time to actually, um, in a really, simple way, kind of to drive out whatever demonic forces were causing you to either feel depressed or to wrestle with sin and things like that. That was my understanding then. That's kind of how that was.
Okay.
Just some setting free of. Uh, I mean, this is still a minor point. So, but just setting free of things that you wrestled with. So,
Okay.
it was
Okay.
all new prayer concepts to me, which was why I
Mhm.
think they stuck in my brain. So, but those are all minor points.
Okay.
Um, let's see. I Over the next few years, I just became even more involved in their prayer ministry and in being on the worship team, and really thought I was just kind of finding my home and my stride, and um, felt like I was just being open to this is what the Lord created me to do, and this is where I was always
Mm,
going to be. That it was I was always going to be with this group of people, and we were going to walk together, to just to pursue the Lord, however that looked. Um, and so um, after a while, I got, like I said, more involved on the worship team. And there were times that even I was leading the worship team when the actual worship leader, who was also one of the leaders, pastors. I don't remember if we called them pastors at the time, but that would be the equivalent to that. I think we just
Okay.
called them leaders. Anyway, when he would leave to go out of town, then I would take over leading and just kind of learning how to do all of that. So just basically just kind of growing in my responsibility at the church. And I felt like I was learning and being taught, and they were pouring into me. So
mm.
May of '99, I graduated college. And at this point, I decided to stay in Bolivar for this church. I was committed to this church. I was single. My mom lived in Kansas City. My my brother was in Kansas City. I didn't have family in Bolivar, but they weren't very far away. But um, just being a single girl, I just decided this is where I'm going to stay. These were kind of my closer than family church family, and so that I was just committed to that. So I got a job at the college where I was at, first working for an evangelist in his office, and then joined the admissions team for the actual university. And so I was kind of helping with recruiting and stuff like that. And I did that for a couple of years until we started talking during that time while I was working there. We started um, learning about the IHOP in Kansas City
Okay.
and taking trips up there and kind of learning what they were doing and trying to kind of understand that philosophy and um,
Mhm.
their goal and kind of their theology about prayer and 24-hour prayer and all of that. So that is what kind of started this conversation of, hey, what if we did that here in Bolivar? And we started, we were looking into that. So that's happening, kind of this, a lot of these things kind of run in parallel. So while we
Mhm.
were kind of exploring that and doing that, in 2001, I actually started doing some counseling with Dean. He was a pastor. He was not a trained counselor. I will say that out at the the beginning. But for me, as a young woman just out of college, I was like, well, he's my pastor, and he seems really confident at doing this. So I
Mhm.
didn't know any better. And I was one that I had wrestled a lot with depression
Mm.
all through growing up, through most of my life. That was just a struggle with me for me. So I started counseling with them because I was struggling with my roommate. We weren't getting along, and so that's kind of where it all started. I think that was the reason I first went to try and figure out how to make things work. But it quickly um, evolved into dealing with issues like my parents' divorce and issues at the time I thought I had with my mom. I love my mom. I will say this on the outset. I don't even remember what those issues were. So if she ever watches this, I don't even remember what they were. So, but
Right.
there was that. And so Dean and his first wife, Amy, who, I knew at the time, they had just finished going to this school that taught them, it was Elijah House prayer ministry. So it was a certain type of prayer ministry that blended prayer and counseling. And
Mhm.
so they had just gone to that. And so they began to counsel me using that method. And also another lady that we will give her a pseudonym because it is her story to tell, but she
Mm.
does play a large behind the scenes role in my
Okay.
story. Um, but we will call her Tiffany.
Okay.
Okay. And this at Elisha House, I believe this was inner healing. Was it not memories, repressed memories, things
This
like that?
one was not. This
That was
one
not
was not.
okay.
Elijah House, I've in it again, this is 20 years ago
Okay.
and a world that I'm not part of. I don't even know if these ministries, if either of, these things that played a big role for me, I don't even know if they're still around or, what that is.
Okay.
Um, but anyway, so the first two people that they started to experiment in this
Mm.
type of prayer and counseling was myself and then Tiffany, pseudonym Tiffany.
Right.
And so then what happened was then I started meeting with Dean once a week, like you would a regular counselor, and talking about this. I talked extensively about my past, my own sin struggles with sexual purity when I was in high school, and just kind of some of those classic issues that a young girl has when she grows up without a dad and in a single home and
Sure.
all of that. So that was kind of what we began talking about.
Mm.
So, so that's happening at the same time that we have this house of prayer stuff, also that we're kind of as a church looking at. So then in May 2002, so about a year after I first started doing counseling with Dean, or a year into it, I did actually officially quit my job at the university to be what we called a in-town missionary. So I raised support. I sent out letters. I raised support to be a missionary. And my mission was to help develop this house of prayer in Bolivar. So
Mhm.
I was part of coordinating with other churches, actually leading prayer and worship time, and during certain hours of the day, and kind of a lot of the administrative work behind that, and just kind of pushing that. So I did that as well as then did some administrative work for our church, to kind of, in some ways, give me something else to do because it was just this groundwork that needed to be done. So I did that. And at that time, then I was also co-leader of the worship team. And then the church had just established a leadership team for this small church. So, and it consisted of just all the people that were part of ministry leaders, things like that. Nothing unusual.
Mhm.
So, um, then Easter of 2002. Um, And I don't remember. So at some point after starting the House of Prayer, I paused doing counseling with Dean. I think we um, just didn't feel like we were getting anywhere, or there wasn't anything more to talk about. I don't remember exactly. I just remember that we paused. Um, but then in Easter of 2002, we began counseling again. Um, and the sessions throughout that following summer actually became even more intense, and this is where things kind of changed as far as the counseling. I don't know if it changed, but it definitely increased. Dean had learned about this ministry technique called theophostic prayer.
Mhm.
Again, I don't even know if that's still out there, if anybody knows what this is.
It is.
Actually, huh?
It is
It is, yeah,
badly.
yes.
Yeah, I found my book, like this workbook that I have for it when I was looking for something else like a few weeks ago, looking through really old books. I think it was maybe tucked in with my old like elementary school yearbooks or whatever up in the attic. I saw it. I'm not even sure why I still have it. So, and I had forgotten I had it, but yeah, so he went through that and wanted to bring that to our church to add to, I think, the tool belt. And he actually invited a couple of the leaders that did the training. I want to say they were out of Tennessee. And so
Okay.
they came to our church and did this training. So several of us on the leadership team were trained to to do this type of prayer, which basically, for anybody who doesn't know, is a little bit more of a imagery, like prayer and imagining uh, the worst moments you've ever had, or a really bad moment, and then, or returning to that spot, I guess, maybe emotionally and mentally, however you want to word that, and then imagining Jesus being in that moment. So it
Mhm.
was probably a lot of new age thought involved in it that I didn't catch on to. That's what that was. Um,
Neat.
and so we learned how to do that. Well, what came out of that, so it was during when one of the leaders was there, and I don't remember if I knew this at the time. It was targeted and created more specifically for those who had dealt with sexual abuse.
Okay.
So that, I think, was like, what it was used for, maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, um, which matters when it was during that summer that when he invited those leaders there, I was the recipient. Basically, we would all sit in a circle, and one person at a time would be the one that they were ministering to. And
Mhm.
during the time that I was being ministered to, that's when I remember just having these thoughts and impressions come up um, that I had been uh, assaulted by someone,
Okay.
but it was like framed as a repressed memory.
Mhm.
And so I remember at the time feeling really uncomfortable because I felt like I knew myself really well. And you kind of think, oh gosh, it just a little bit turns your world upside down when you're being told that you
Mhm.
just didn't remember this. Like I had no memory of it. So, and I remember feeling really skeptical. And actually, after it was all over, just going to Dean and basically saying, I don't know about this. Do you think it's true? Do you think that this is possible? That I really just really didn't know this. And he did tell me that because I was skeptical, that that was proof that it was true.
Huh.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and me being again, this young girl, and he's my pastor, I had at this point no reason that I knew of to not trust him. And
Mhm.
so I believed him. I was like, okay, this must be, why would he, you know, lead me astray? Why would he do that? And so, um, so then we started this um, counseling with him to deal with this abuse. Um, I remember oftentimes really feeling afraid, really feeling unsure of these memories that were coming up, um, that that just felt foreign, and but so um, and I continued to just kind of ask Dean throughout the process if this was true, could and because of his continual, yes, I think this is true, I trusted his discernment and not
Sure.
my own.
Mm.
um, because I felt like at that point I didn't, you know, I had forgotten these things and was convinced
Mm.
that my mind didn't want me to remember them, and so I couldn't trust myself and
Sure.
needed to trust him. So,
Valerie, can I ask you a quick question?
mhm.
What was, you were about 22 at this time?
In 2022, I am probably 24.
Okay.
23,
Somebody wants,
24, and
uh
Dean, of
huh,
course, is your pastor. He's in his 30s, I guess, at this point, right?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. I was
that's
probably a
fine.
little bit older. Like I should have. I actually was afraid you were going to ask me actual ages, and I
I promise you
needed
not to ask
to
any
do the
questions
math
here.
there. I needed to do the math there. So if somebody wants to do that math and let me know how old I was. So
Okay.
I think you wrote in your document on one of them that you were 22, and I don't think we had that.
Yeah, I'm not
But
sure. I don't
anyway,
have that pulled
is
up
that
here.
you had the
at
dates? Because
this
I was trying to
point,
do the math too of like,
well, here's what I remember. Tony and I married in 2004, and I was 28 when we got married. So
okay.
I would have been 25, 26
Okay. All right.
about when this happened.
Great.
Being in that place of just feeling like I couldn't trust myself, that I needed to
Right.
trust him, and that was his counsel to me. So we did several months of it. During I remember on our very last session, and this is something I told you guys at our last meeting, our very last session, I did um, I was wrestling with just these memories, and what had happened was just kind of this growth in me, or this just growing fear that, you know how was I defined by this abuse that I thought had happened, and what does that say about me, and all of these things. And I remember talking to Dean about this, and confessing that I was just kind of worried about what this meant about my identity. And his response was, um, if your purpose is just for men to sleep with you, why am I not trying to do that right now? And I remember at the time, I still remember the feeling I had in my gut of, I don't think that was okay to say.
No.
Right.
And I don't even remember having a response. Um, I, it was years before I realized that how appalling that it was that he said that. And
Absolutely.
I'll be honest, I'm saying it in in more appropriate terms than the exact words that he
Okay.
said,
Okay.
just for
That'll be helpful for, obviously putting this out on YouTube,
yeah.
but yeah, that's just
But
appalling.
that was the gist of what he had said.
Mm,
And after the session, he did come back and apologize. And he was like, I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have done that. I was just trying something new, whatever. So, and
Yeah.
I didn't
Uh,
tell anybody, I didn't tell anybody about that until I told my husband when we were married in 2004. At some point during that first year, I remember telling him, and he was the first person I told that that Dean had said that. So, um, and to be clear, too, while Dean was counseling me with all of these um, quote unquote repressed memories, um, there were two other girls within the church, one of them being Tiffany and another one being another girl. And
mm,
all three of us miraculously had repressed memories of assault. So,
wow.
yeah. And
Were
I
these
remember,
suggestions made by Dean himself, or were they things that you were coming up with, or
you know, because what I think probably happened was it was a bit of, I think this theophostic thing is highly suggestive
okay.
yeah.
because, and it's all kind of putting these thoughts, it's, has this happened? Has this happened? Or
Okay.
you already know going into it that it is targeted towards those who have been assaulted in this way or abused in this way.
Mm.
And so I think it's all just a matter of there's just kind of these seeds that are planted,
Sure.
and your brain does crazy things when it is kind of uh, when things are suggested. You know, you can have
Mm,
something suggested, and your mind just kind of comes up with these images.
Right.
Now, in most settings, people can say, "Oh, well, that wasn't true," and
mhm,
Right.
dismiss it. But in these types of things, you're questioning everything because you're searching for these deep, dark reasons as to why you're depressed or why
Mm.
and for
wow.
some people, this is where it's tricky. For some people, it's true. For
Right.
some people, these things have actually happened. For
Sure.
me, like I had legitimate, trauma from growing up, not this, but I
Right.
had trauma that, for me, depression was rooted in. So that's where it's just really tricky. And I think that the enemy just kind of takes these things and he runs with them.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And so I think it was a mixture of these highly suggestive counseling techniques mixed with my opinion and my experience as someone who wanted them to be true,
Mm,
meaning Dean
right.
wanted these things to be true because then the counselor gets to kind of swoop in and be the
Hero.
one to rescue the person.
Hero,
Yes.
The
kind of
hero.
like Dean
Yeah.
Briggs. Yeah.
Well, and the coupled with the idea that it's being tied to your faith in God, which,
Yes.
as you're
Yeah.
describing, is your most important thing to you as a woman at that time, and even now, that, well, so someone who's in a powerful position of leadership
Hmm.
representing God as a pastor,
Hmm.
who's
Hmm.
telling you, well, if the fact that you have questions about it, it's true. I,
Hmm. Hmm.
I really don't. That is
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
appallingly awful, and I'm very sorry
Yeah.
that happened.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is important to know that there were two other ladies that
Okay.
were kind of going through or being told the same things because that's what that was a light bulb a little bit for me
Okay.
of how is that possible? How are, in
Mhm.
this small tiny church of 30 people, how are there three of us
Right.
that, so
Sure.
it just started to me that was a little bit of a crack in that just seems odd, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I
Sure.
tucked it in my, put it in my back pocket and just kind of left it there. I don't even think I said anything to anyone at the moment, during that time, but I remember thinking
Mhm.
that. So, so then in October of 2002, the man that was the worship leader at the time and one of the other elders, he actually, for a bit of a moral failure, stepped down from leading worship. And so then I ended up being promoted, to leading the worship team. So I started leading the worship team in October of 20, nope, 2002.
Okay.
2002.
And I loved this. It was something I was passionate about, something I was familiar with. Um, I wasn't perfect at it. I was a young girl just trying to kind of figure out how to do this and lead the team.
Right.
But I think overall, that was a really good experience for me in doing that and learning how to do that. I had received a lot of confirmation from people around that. So that part was a good thing,
Mm,
and I think that's
yeah.
what makes stories like these hard for people because you can have horrible things happening alongside good things,
Right.
and then you got to figure out how to untangle them.
That's even more
So,
confusing
It sure is.
right,
because it's you're
right,
living your best version right there.
yeah,
Passionate worship leader, young, excited, and then also this whole other thing happening. So it's
on the
very
side, yeah,
yeah,
that nobody knows about.
right.
So yeah, so I think the whole thing about leading the worship team though just highlights the fact that again I was a little bit further up into leadership, so working a little bit more closer proximity with those in leadership like Dean,
Mhm.
and the other two and the other ministry leaders. So in February of 2003, I did come to Dean, and I remember feeling this way. I don't remember, why I felt like I don't know. But I did come to him and I told him that I felt a warning in my like in prayer time about him and his pride.
Okay.
And normally with things like that, I didn't take them to him. There was another actually the worship leader who had been removed from
Mhm.
uh that role at the time, he was usually who I would kind of go and confide, like I'm kind of concerned about these things. These are some things I'm kind of seeing or whatever. But he wasn't there. So I went looking back at it now, I just think the audacity. But I went to Dean and told him that I felt like, that there was an issue of pride that
Mm,
the Lord wanted him to know. So
Mm.
um so I told him. And then in I don't know, I don't remember. I think at the time he received it. He said thank you, whatever. That was it. I don't remember a whole lot after that. Just kind of life went back to normal. And I
Mhm.
didn't think that it mattered until after everything started playing out and years later I look back and I remember that moment and
Sure.
thinking, "Oh, that's where my guess is that's where all of what now starts to happen. That's why. That's
Sure.
why that happened."
Okay.
Um, so I in May on May 4th of 2003, so just a few months later, I was leading worship for our church and some other local churches. We had kind of done a citywide worship service at our building. And I remember the date specifically because at that same night, while we were there worshiping, there were these tornadoes that actually hit Stockton, Missouri, this small town, um, of that year, and they were pretty devastating to Stockton. So it was just kind of a big night. Anyway, I remember that because later it comes into the story of their
Yes, it does. Yeah.
their proof of what kind of person I was. So then 2 days later, on May 6th,
mhm.
I actually stopped up to the church office. I was going to do some work. At the time, I was working for the church, but then also doing substitute teaching in town.
Mm.
And I was supposed to substitute teach in the afternoon. So I'd gone up to the church to get some administration work done. while I was up there, Dean came in to talk to me, and Tom, the worship, he wasn't, I don't remember what he was doing at the time. I think he was just still kind of around, but he just wasn't leading worship. But Dean came and told me that something had come up and I wasn't going to go. We were supposed to have what we called it B-Hop. We were supposed to have a meeting that night with some of the other churches, and I generally led those meetings. And he told me that I wasn't going to lead the meeting, and that I also wasn't going to lead worship the following Sunday. But he couldn't tell me that day, and that we were going to meet on Friday with all of leadership, or the three. So May 9th, then, of 2003, I met with the leadership of the church. And it was at this meeting, so this is with the three leaders and myself. It was just us. At this meeting, Dean tells me that during a time of his personal prayer, he heard the audible voice of God, and that God had told him a lot of things about the church and about himself, but some of those things that God told him were about me. They concerned me. And he said that they felt that I had serious issues of control and manipulation and deceit. And he said that there was more to that, but he couldn't tell me all of it yet. But for the meantime, I was going to be removed from all influence within the church. So I wasn't going to be part of the worship team, the intercessors team, counseling team. I could only attend church as a regular member. He said that they did tell me at the time it wasn't due to some moral failure, but that somehow I had made an unholy alliance. And that was all that they said. There wasn't any description of what that meant, what they meant by that yet. So that was what they told me. So, and he did tell me then that they weren't going to explain more at this point, but that I had to agree to conditions. Those conditions were that I had to find a new job, because remember, I was working for the church. I had become, a missionary raising support. I was working for the church. And so I had to find a new job. They were going to set up a time for me to see some ministry couple in St. Louis. They did some sort of prayer ministry. I'm not entirely sure exactly who they were connected to, but I was going to have to agree to that. I had to submit all of my friendships to monitoring, that I could not give advice, and I couldn't talk about deeper life things. All of my conversations had to remain surface level.
What?
It's crazy
And
to
they were
recount.
accusing you of controlling,
Yeah, yeah,
when we could see clearly this is a
yeah,
control issue, right?
yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy yeah. So, but these are the parts that that are important to get out. So, they said that they also were going to meet with each of my friends to explain to them what was happening, and to basically tell them how to monitor their interactions with me. So, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. At the time, of course, I didn't understand, what was
Right,
going on,
right.
but I also didn't know enough to think this is crazy. Like, I
Well,
think for me, already having gone through a little bit of, well, you have these memories that you didn't remember.
right.
So I've already lost some trust in myself. So I think it made it easy at this point for me to just be like, oh, well, there's just more I didn't know,
Right.
and I didn't understand.
Sure, sure.
So I,
Well, it was three of the leaders together
Yeah, these are
coming
your
to
right,
you.
pastors,
It
right?
wasn't just
yeah,
even one now. It's now,
right, right.
oh,
It was three of
Valerie,
them.
I'm so sorry.
So
That is
That's
sorry, I
so
am
horrible.
reading.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
I
for
am
it.
reading so that way I get it all out. But
Whatever you
like,
need, you go
Yep,
on.
you
You're
take your
good.
time.
you turn 50, you suddenly need
It's
glasses.
really true.
You know this.
You need lots of
Okay.
things when you turn
Yeah,
50.
right. Okay, so I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I didn't want to be a danger to the people around me, and
Goodness.
that was what was being implied.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't want to end up living, damned to whatever was going on inside of me. I wanted to be obviously I'm being told something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to get out of it. So I'm going to do whatever you say if that means that I can be free of this and not, hurt those around me. So I left that meeting and I agreed to all of those things. And then we were going to meet in about a month to decide kind of next steps. So I went home. I remember going home, and my best friend at the time was there, and I just kind of explained to her what happened. And she and I both were just so confused, and we just kind of cried and prayed. And she stayed the night with me, so I didn't have to be there by myself. And the next morning, I got up and went to Kansas City to go see my mom. I had already planned to do that, so I went and did that. At the end of the weekend, I came back to Bolivar and got in touch with, my best friend. And at this point, she had changed her mind with what how she saw all this. So she was now communicated to me that she was in agreement with the leadership. And I remember thinking, even how she talked to me was so different. The tone in her voice was so different. It was a big shift from 2 days
Yes.
ago, two
Sure.
nights ago. She was no longer, at this point, no longer sympathetic, but she was actually kind of defensive and accusatory at this. So I was like, okay, to me at the time, it felt like confirmation. It was confusing, but it felt like, well, this is my best friend. This must be
Right.
true. So,
Ugh.
um, as well as I could during this season, I followed the conditions, the things that they had asked.
Mhm.
Even so that I went to all of my friends first and said, "Hey, leadership are gonna reach out to you. They're gonna talk to you about some things. I just want you to know that I'm okay with it. I know it's happening. I want good out of this. So, um, I just, not that I didn't know if it mattered, but I wanted my friends to know I know
Yeah.
what's going on and I'm okay. I want good, whatever. This was me trying to um, submit to the process and trust the process.
Sure.
So um, there were, I was trying to think, I did, I found a job at a group home, a nearby, group home, and did that for a while. And kind of kept pressing them to make the arrangements for me to go see this couple in St. Louis because I thought if they could free me of this, of course I want to go do this. I want to move along in this process. So, um, and at this point, people didn't seem to treat me differently. Most people were still pretty confused as to what was happening and why this was going on. Tiffany, however, I remember paying attention, and she would not talk to me, wouldn't have anything to do with me. Um, and when I would ask others about it, I was told I was just being paranoid. It wasn't that. It was just,
But that was different. Before that, you guys had a
yeah. She and I were friends. We weren't like
okay.
best friends, but she and I were friends. And I actually had played. And again, it's her story to tell.
Mhm.
But in her own counseling sessions with Dean, I had was pretty involved in caring for her. I wasn't involved in her sessions, but I was
Okay.
involved in caring for her outside of that,
Okay.
and helping with that. So um, it eventually got to where people like my best friend would take a really long time to answer my calls. This was back before cell phone. You had answering machines and your landlines. Um, they kind of stopped hanging out with me, which was weird and confusing.
Mm.
At one time, I called uh, one of the other leaders. His name was Tom, and I was just I was concerned about people really concerned about gossip and people talking about it because it was just confusing. And not that I thought they were doing anything bad. Remember at the time, through this whole process, I thought I was I was the bad one.
Right.
Sure.
But I still wanted to be covered in kind of some decency and, a little bit of privacy if I could. And I remember calling Tom and asking him about this, if they could just kind of, because that courtesy had been given to Tiffany as she walked through some very personal things, and we were asked, don't talk about it with other people and just kind of give her that privacy. I had asked him, can I have that same, courtesy? And it was at this time that he actually responded in anger towards me and told me that this was a different case, and that um, that was just it was just different, and so I wasn't necessarily afforded that same privacy. Um, and it was what was mostly telling in this conversation with him. That was the first time that he or anybody had said to me that if I didn't submit to leadership, that I would be asked to leave the church. I didn't even know that was an option.
Oh,
That wasn't said before, and like I said, to the best of my knowledge, I had over submitted. I had,
right.
tried to
Absolutely.
be really open with everyone. Um, and so that was really surprising and just kind of threw me back a little bit like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we would go there. I never even thought that that was an option. Um, so then in June, now we jump up to June of 2003, and this was about a month later. We had a second meeting, but this time in the meeting, they wanted to just read to me a statement that Dean had written that they were going to read to the church regarding my being removed from leadership. So,
Okay.
and I remember as he read it, I wasn't real comfortable with how descriptive it was, and it was really detailed of all the things that they were accusing me of. Now, control, manipulation, those things, did I struggle with them? Sure, I did,
Yeah.
Mhm.
like a normal person.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But that's what was so deceptive, is they would throw out these terms and I could look at myself and be like, yeah, I mean, I could see that.
Right.
So that was another reason why it was easy for me to kind of cling to what they were saying is true, because I didn't know that they rose to the level that you know that needed all of this regard and being so concerned about. But those things are hard when it's like, well, yeah, I could see that. I like people. I like it when people do what I want them to do. So, you know,
We
and
all do. Yeah.
yeah, right, right. So that was, part of again what made this so confusing. But
Sure.
um so it was during that meeting though, when they were reading the statement, that um I asked a few more questions, but they just still weren't willing to give me any more answers. They still wouldn't tell me whatever this more was. They just kept saying there was more that they weren't telling me, but they couldn't tell me, or they wouldn't tell me. They also hadn't contacted that couple in St. Louis at all. And so to me, I remember at that time thinking, you're waiting for me to uphold my end, which I did, but they
Mhm.
Right.
hadn't even followed through on things that they said they were going to do. So
Mhm.
I remember being frustrated, of course, but
Sure.
Yeah.
they still just kept saying, "You just need to trust us. Just need to trust the process." So I do remember telling them at the time that I trusted God, but I didn't trust them anymore. So for me, that was already starting to kind of erode as this was kind of playing out, and I felt like I
Nice.
wasn't getting
Nice.
answers. So they did. It was in this meeting though that they did tell me that I don't know why this one makes me, they told me they had always had concerns about me, but they just didn't pursue them. Um, and so
Uh,
telling me that I never should have been a part of the ministry team, um, or the prayer team or any of the things that I was doing. Um, they said that they believed that I had deceived them for the entirety of the 5 years that I had been there. And they were just now beginning to realize what was true. So um, they sent me off telling me to go seek the Lord so that I would come to the same realization that they did. So um,
I am so
I remember
sorry you had to
leaving
deal with
just
that,
thinking,
Valerie. I am so
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Um,
Thank you. I remember years later, or a couple years later from this, being in counseling, and when my counselor, how healing it was when she just said, she um, read to me Luke 17:2, that it is better for these to have a millstone tied around their neck and thrown into the
yeah,
river than to cause one of the little ones to stumble. And
exactly.
realizing how serious Jesus takes this. Like,
Mhm.
there is grace for mistakes, but this isn't just, oops, I made a mistake. This
Yeah,
right.
is, I think very demonic, and, and just really tearing down a person. So, and that's how serious Jesus takes it. But
yeah.
I wish I would
Uh,
have known
I
that then. I didn't know that. So,
right.
but um,
Mm.
so the following Sunday, Dean did read a statement, but it actually ended up being a very shortened version. The guy couldn't win for me at that point. I was mad that I didn't like the first version because it was really exposing me. And then I didn't like the second version because it felt untrue. It felt too vague and misleading. So I don't know if I probably at that point wouldn't have been happy with whatever he was, going to say. So
Understandably.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was June, middle of June. So it would have been a couple weeks later. It was July 2nd of 2003. I was up at the church parking lot, and I had created some paintings, and one of them, I know at least one of them was up at the church. And I had noticed that it had been taken down, and nobody had said anything to me about it. They had just taken it down. And so I asked someone, I reached out to, I think it was the former worship leader. He might have been reinstalled at this point. But I had reached out to find out why it was taken down, and they wouldn't return my call. So that was kind of, there was just this gradual distancing of not being willing to communicate with me. A couple days later at church, I talked with one of the other pastors. So this isn't Joe, and this isn't the worship leader. This is the third one. Um, and I told him that I was trying to get a hold of someone about these painting, the painting, and he acknowledged that they had talked about that I was trying to get in touch with them, and but didn't really say why no one would call back, wouldn't reach out or whatever, and wouldn't tell me why the painting was taken down. But it was actually during that conversation that it was told that they were even questioning whether or not I was even a believer, that
Oh my goodness.
my salvation was even in question at this point amongst them. So um, and all through this, it kept being said at this from this point on, it continued, like a recurring refrain was, um, we've never seen God work this way before. You must be somebody really important for God to do this, to act in this way. So, and this was the first time he said, I must be somebody very important, for God to, um, for something like this to be happening to me. Basically, the idea was I must be so important, and that's why the enemy is attacking me so hard,
Sure.
or why this has happened. And that they didn't think that I would ever be free of this if I ever left this church. So of
Wow.
course, out of fear of, I didn't want to be in bondage. I didn't want to
Yeah.
be condemned for the rest of my life. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not leaving. I hadn't really thought of leaving anyway. But that was just for me, this, if you ever leave, you'll carry this the rest of your life, that type of thing. So then it was 2 weeks later. This was
Yeah.
on a
Wow.
Saturday. I was working at the group home, and I generally worked nights, so I would do these overnight shifts. And so I was about to end my shift. I don't remember if it was an overnight shift. I feel like it was, because in that morning I was gonna go home to see my mom in Kansas City for the weekend. And I
Mhm.
just kind of got this feeling of, I probably bought, and I think some of it, I also have a really strong sense of obligation, which probably played a lot in this. I just felt like, well, if I'm going to go out of town, I want them to know that I'm going out of town. I remember thinking, I don't want them to think I'm leaving, because I'm not leaving the church. I just want to go see my mom and I'll be back. I remember that was kind of my motive for reaching out to them. So I had actually my called my answering machine to hear my messages, as one did, back in the
Back in the
1900s.
day.
So
I
early
remember those.
2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Remember that.
right. Um, and so, and I actually had a message from Dean telling me that he wanted to meet. So, as soon as I got off work, I called them and set up a meeting to meet up at the church to talk with the three of them. And I remember just feeling really nervous and anxious about this meeting. Um, I I kept hearing from when it was told to me that if I didn't submit, I would be, kicked out. I remember thinking, but surely not, because I have, like, I've
Mhm.
tried to give them no reason to, think that I should leave, or that I wasn't submitting or doing, the right thing. So, but I do arrive at the church, sit down in the office with the three of them, and Dean then tells me, again, this is the audible voice of the Lord telling him these things, that I wasn't submitting to their process. And even though it appeared to me that I was submitting, my heart was not actually with my actions.
Yeah.
So he said that I was going to have to leave the church, that basically that was the end of the road. Now remember, they say that, and just prior to that, I'm told, if you ever leave the church, you're going to be stuck with this forever.
Sure,
So it
sure.
was incredibly devastating, confusing.
Oh my.
I didn't know what side was up.
Frightening.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, as a young
Yeah,
Yeah,
woman,
because if
yeah,
you
so
believe
frightening.
them,
Yeah.
then
right.
now they're like, "See ya," and you're like, "Wait, then
Yeah,
what does that say for my heart and my
right,
bondage and my walk with the Lord?"
right. Yeah, yeah. It was condemnation. Like,
Yeah.
that's what they were doing. They were condemning me. So I did ask if I could ever come back to the church, and they said that they don't know. I mean, to me, I'm just like, it's astounding to me that I would even want to come back. But that's where my heart was. Like, I never imagined my life not being with these people and this church.
Yeah,
And
you
so,
believed them, right? I
yes,
mean,
yeah,
you trusted in them.
yeah,
The word that's coming up right now that I'm thinking of, this is sick what they did with
Right,
her.
yeah,
right.
It really is.
yeah,
It's just horrific.
Well, and
I
thinking
cannot believe
about
it.
where you are in your journey with the Lord and your journey in life, you start there, newly graduate from college, your
hmm,
whole starting your career, your life with the Lord. You
hmm,
don't go back to your city near your family. You choose to stay here
hmm,
because you
hmm,
said earlier your church family was more family to you. So,
hmm, hmm,
and then they guide you through this process where they make you question everything about yourself.
hmm,
Right?
hmm,
And then they tell you, oh, we've had questions about you the whole time, which is
right,
weird because they put you in leadership. So
right,
that's interesting.
yep, yep.
And then don't leave or you'll be stuck like this, however this is. And oh, we heard audibly from the Lord
But you
all
have
these
to leave.
horrible things about you, but we can't tell you what they are.
How do you counter that one, right?
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
that's like, this is the ultimate
That's
control,
the trump card. Yes.
manipulation
It's every
Yes.
level of egregious.
of
I
abuse,
can't even.
absolute abuse.
And
This
Yep.
is
and power and I mean,
sickening.
talking about you being controlling.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Wow. And you're not married and you're
Mhm,
separated from your family. And
mhm,
then they've separated and poisoned. I'm using that
mhm,
word. You did not use
mhm,
that word, but
mhm.
I'm using it. All of
Yep.
your friends
Yes.
and
Everybody's against her.
your
Yep.
community,
Yeah.
your
Yep.
church community, so much so that even your best friend, who again, I don't fault your best friend, I
Mhm,
fault the leadership for
mhm, mhm.
poisoning that
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
Yeah.
while they're manipulating other young women.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, all of that is true. And, I I wish obviously at the time that I would have had clear vision to see what was going on, or even just somebody around that kind of was like, "Hey,
Right.
this isn't right," but there just wasn't that in this kind of tight community.
Right.
Um, so
Well, and they covered that base too because you
sure,
weren't allowed to tell anybody.
Yeah.
sure,
Right.
sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I remember when they were telling me I had to leave, I was like, okay, well then can you at least tell me the rest of the information so I can leave,
Yeah.
knowing the rest of this. And they said that they couldn't tell me. And they did also told me that if I chose to attend a church that they had relationship with, that they would contact that church to tell them their concerns about me. Um, as one would legitimately do a little bit in, like a proper church discipline type thing. But this was the counterfeit of
Yeah.
what
Nothing
Absolutely.
proper
what
about
is
this
biblical.
process.
Hmm.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
at all. And
yeah,
we've said it before, but it's that type of thing of, who do they think they are? Right?
hmm,
We said that about Dean Briggs before.
Right.
This is just appalling.
Well,
yeah.
and
Who does
I'm
this?
assuming, not that I know this, so correct me if I'm wrong, Bolivar, Missouri doesn't seem like it's a beacon of thousands and thousands or millions of people. So I'm guessing
No,
if
it
they're
can
trying
hide.
to blackball you from all the churches that they have a relationship
They
with,
probably have
Hmm.
relationship with them, right?
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
probably leaving you with not very many options in your
I
local town.
mean, right, no, and the one time so I visited a local, really large church here in Springfield where I live now.
Okay.
Um, I visited after that, I had visited once. Somehow they found out that I had visited, and he did call the pastor of that church. Now, this is a mega church. We're talking thousands and thousands of people go to this church, and they kind of blew him off, like, they didn't take him seriously, whatever. But I don't remember how I found out, probably through the grapevine a little bit that they did. I mean, he kept his word. He tried to. Now they don't have a relationship with that church,
Right.
Yeah.
so why he called them, I don't know. I can speculate, but
Right.
um,
Narcissism
so they
has no
did.
bounds.
There's
My
that.
words.
So yeah,
My words.
It's a
yeah.
good word.
I'm just saying it.
So,
Real.
That's a good word. Yeah.
but I do remember leaving, and I asked them, if I can ever be free. Again, I'm just asking, can I, you guys are done, you're kicking me out, but can I be free from this? Is there a path forward for me? And he said no, that they didn't see that ever happening, that I would ever actually be free from whatever was wrong.
Who
Um,
does this?
What?
yeah.
God can't
So,
redeem anyone
yeah,
if you're that
well,
bad?
yeah. So I asked them, and I do remember this specifically. I asked them, "How am I supposed to go to church again?" And they shrugged their shoulders. They shrugged their shoulders. They had no answer for that.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
and this is where they did it again. They said that they've never seen God work this way, so it must just be an extreme circumstance, or they use the word exception. So,
Perhaps it wasn't God.
so
Yeah.
but
Again,
yeah,
my word.
yeah,
My
I
word.
get it. No, I get it. I get it. So, um,
Ugh.
And before I left, Dean told me that God will do whatever it takes to get me back. And that was his excuse for all of this. This was God acting in an extreme way to redeem me from something that I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know.
But he knows and won't tell you.
Yeah.
That was the impression I
Wow.
was given. Yeah.
Because he's the big guy that does
Hmm.
the
Knew all the
vertical work
things.
with the Lord, right?
Right.
So, yeah,
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
So they did give me my painting. They handed it back to me and told me, it's time for you to go. I do remember this. They offered to pray for me, and in the first moment of clarity, I said
Wow.
no.
The audacity.
Yeah,
Ah,
but I said no. I told
good
them
for you.
that I remember being so angry and so confused that I didn't I didn't want their prayers. I didn't want that. So they did tell me, again, I could be friends with people, but that they would still monitor those friendships even after kicking me out. So meaning those that were still in the church, obviously. So, and they made me leave the building and told me that if I ever came back, they would ask me to leave.
Wow.
So,
this is
um,
what they do in a congregation that I've worked with in communist China, by the way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So they had kicked me out. And then at this point, I remember at that time, I went home. I went back to Kansas City. Like I
Mm.
had lost everything. Even that moment, I had lost my church and
Yeah.
friends, and I hadn't really lost all of them yet. But there was this was just kind of that beginning. So, but really, truly, almost everyone at that point had cut off communication with me. My best friend brought me back my stuff that she had. We had lived so much life together, as friends do. You've got this kind of cross,
Yeah.
all of your stuff. So she brought me my all of my stuff back. And she told me that I was in denial and that I was just refusing to see what was true. Um, and there was another lady who said that she had left the church, and we stayed in communication, but that she felt like she had had a dream that told her that she should go back to Alliance, and then she stopped communicating with me. I had other friends who would kind of stick around for a little bit. One of them was a really sweet friend. She eventually stopped returning my calls and then sent me a letter at one point saying that she didn't want to stand against the Lord. So she needed to actually agree with the church leadership and cut off communication. So what I gathered was they told me that I could still have these friendships. They would just be monitored. What I gather is that's not what they told the
Yeah.
others.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I remember this was a small town. I was terrified to go in public
Oh,
because
I'm
of who I
sure.
was going to run
Yeah.
into, who I was going to see, and constantly just kind of having friends that would stop communicating. And
Right.
I had relationships with people outside of the church, but most of them weren't living in town. They were, other places. So this really was my community, and the people that I knew. So
Right. May I ask a question?
sure.
Just, and I'm just curious about this because I know how important it is to us and to you from just our other conversations. Um, where did the Bible figure into all this? Did they ever talk about scripture or talk about, besides God giving them audible impression voices, did they ever show you in
Use scripture.
scripture?
No, and actually what's funny, and that's part of this that I get into, there was one young man that went to the church, and he and I he was kind of a fringe person, and there was a night that he asked me, did they give you a process of reconciliation? And
Hmm.
he talked about told me where that was in scripture. I didn't know my Bible that well. I was a kid that grew up in the church. Um, but my real understanding of the Bible was just kind of what I was taught, or devotionally. So my understanding of God's word was going to be pretty shallow, even though I loved it. I through this experience was taught more to value these words of knowledge and
Right.
these experiences with the Lord. That those kind of they were never to disagree with the Bible,
Right.
but that they were obviously in practice more valued, and kind of
Right.
what they followed. So I didn't understand the word enough at these times to even ask that question. Like
Sure.
I didn't know to ask it. I didn't know that this until this guy said this to me. I didn't even I
Right.
didn't know that this was a thing. So um I did in August, September-ish of 2003, I went to go see a lady. Um, she was about an hour away that she did Elijah House prayer ministry. I looked her up online or somehow, it must have been how I did it. This was me trying to, surely there has to be a way to be free of this. That's what I just keep thinking. Surely there has to be a way. And so I went to her to have her to like meet with her. I told her the whole story. And, basically I just said, I believe the people at Alliance and I am just somehow unable to see it. So my hope was in going to meet with her that my eyes would be opened and I would be able to see what they are seeing. And so went through her whole prayer session, and she was the first one that basically said, she was like, based on your story, I actually think that this is an issue with the leadership, someone in leadership, and not you. Um, so she was one of the first people to say that. I didn't believe her.
I was gonna
I
say, what
just
was it like
Right.
to hear
Yeah.
that after
Yeah.
years of
no.
not?
I thought, well, I'm just so good at deceiving
Oh,
Oh my
that
goodness.
she couldn't see through it. That was my thought. Um, And
So,
so then it was after that, that someone brought to my attention, hey, is there a process of reconciliation? So I went to the Bible to kind of read about that. And I was like, well, they didn't say anything, but I think according to scripture, this should be there. So I did call one of the pastors, um, and to ask about it. And he said there wasn't one established. And again, just reiterated that there was just always this side to me that they just never saw. And it was this time that he said that I had defiled the church,
oh,
defile
and
the
I
church.
had
the
defiled the
church
church and all of the members there.
How
Um,
how did you do that?
by this unnamed deception
mhm.
that
That
she
that
carried in her.
my guess is somehow my presence there. So, and there's more that there were things that they were discussing and talking about as a church that they weren't telling me that I found out that came to light later. Um, but he just said that I needed to come back to the Lord and that he was just not going to talk to me about this anymore. That this was, I couldn't ask any more questions. I couldn't reach out to them anymore. So that was it.
And this wasn't
So
Dean, this was someone else.
this was someone else. It was
Okay.
all, so this is where it does get tricky. Dean was the the directing of all of this, but
Mhm.
these other leaders, they played a role and certainly responsibility, but I would lump them in with also being involved in deception. So they were
Sure.
deceived
Right.
by what Dean was
They were doing
doing.
his bidding. Yeah, because they
Yes,
thought he was hearing an audible voice from the Lord.
yes,
Right.
yes. So, um, so I remember after that going through again lots of weeks of trying to determine what in the world could be wrong with me. I tried making lists of every possible sin I could have ever done, knowingly or unknowingly. I made a list of every person I thought that maybe I had sinned against and was like, okay, well, I will reach out to every single one of them and apologize. And so, because I had just convinced myself that I was just this master deceiver. And so I I remember at this time I spent hours upon hours just kind of obsessing over this, praying over this, trying to figure out. I studied what, evil alliances. I studied humility. What does contrition look like? What does repentance look like? Just kind of searching the word for trying to make sense of all of this. Um, and so uh, at one point, I did call Alliance again and asked if I could set up a meeting just so I could. Well, I wanted to talk to Dean, and the worship minister answered the phone, and he wouldn't let me talk to him. There had suddenly, it seemed to kind of be this, we're now guarding, we're
Mhm.
protecting Dean. And I told him that the reason I had called was that I wanted to, um, I was trying to enact this thing of just like confessing and apologizing to people for where I had sinned. And I wasn't trying to um, get back into the church. I was just trying to make amends,
Yeah.
repent, apologize, whatever. So, um, and he wouldn't let me talk to him, and just said that if this was true, they would ask the Lord, and if this was truly my intent, that they would reach out to me, which of course then they didn't. They never called back. Um, and even when we got phone, he said that he doubted that it would happen, that the Lord would tell them that this was, again, it was always just, I know what you think is true about yourself, but we know the truth. We know more about who you are than you even know. That was this constant
Wow.
message. So, um, and that was the last time that I had attempted to reach out to them and talk to them, to any of them. So, um, then later that year in November, I tried to meet with a lady, or I did meet with a lady at a local church in Springfield that actually did the Freedom in Christ ministry stuff. You guys familiar with that? Again, dealing with just kind of demonic oppression, stuff like that. And I was really just kind of throwing stones at anything to see what will work, what will, help me break out of this, inability to see what was true. So I met with her, told her my whole story, told her everything I could ever remember that I did wrong in my whole life, like poured out all these things. And she also said at the end of the day, she was like, I don't think this is you. I think it's the leadership. And I didn't believe her. I couldn't. I couldn't believe her. It
No.
just,
How could you?
yeah,
Years of programming. You
Yeah.
can't
yeah,
just switch that off.
Yeah.
no, yeah. So I had one person during this time. It was a brother of a friend who was just kind of, he was the first one to kind of say, I think what's happened to you is you've kind of become that sacrificial lamb that they put up before the church, that the leadership kind of put up before the church, and then just kind of sacrificed in front of everybody. So that way there would be no question of their authority, their leadership, and all of those things. That was kind of the first time I had even heard of that, which now I know is typical in these types of settings, and especially in
Sure.
cult-like behavior,
Mhm.
because it garners fellowship, and
Yeah.
people don't
And fear.
question, because
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want that to happen to me. So
Yeah.
I'm going to toe the
Gotta get
line
in
or whatever.
line.
So
Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. So that was the first person that I had kind of heard that. And I remember what that felt like. Like, it felt, when he kind of gave his perspective, I remember it feeling like life and not condemnation.
Wow.
Like, it was like, oh, this isn't, just me.
Wow.
Now, it didn't
Hmm.
change everything, but I remember that just being this, it just sat so differently with me than everything else. Everything else to this point was just condemnation. You're bad. You're bad. You can't do anything about it. You're
Right.
so bad you don't even know how bad you are. So um and then
So a sliver of hope.
I yeah, yeah, I still couldn't bring myself to believe that Alliance was wrong. I remember feeling devastated, literally felt like I had been kicked out of heaven, and I was just condemned to exile. That was the way I felt. So um that the end of that year is when I met Tony, which I, told you guys about that. So I
Yeah.
met him, and right before I left Bolivar. So during this time, not only had I lost the church, but the group home I was working for had lost their accreditation somewhere else, not where we were. There wasn't anything going on where we were, but somewhere else. There was something that happened. So they lost their accreditation. So they had to close. So now I've lost my job, and I've lost my church, and I've lost my community, all of my friends. And so I had a couple cousins who lived in Washington, D.C., and one had a job, like he had a just kind of a he just had connections to get me a job, and another one had a room in her townhome where she was living that I could rent from her. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna move to DC. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start life over and figure out, what this looks like. And so I did that, and Tony and I stayed in communication, that whole time. And basically, long story short, but even though it's the better part of the story, Tony and we met on December 31st of 2003, and we married July 31st of 2004. So we met and married in 7 months. So
Okay.
Okay.
I wouldn't recommend it, but I also know that sometimes it works and the Lord does that. So that's what
We actually have you beat.
We have 3
We're
months.
3.5 months. Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it just
It
God
works.
happens. And
God moves sometimes,
he
and you gotta
does.
say yes.
He does. Would I tell
So
my children that? No.
No.
right?
But
I tell
In
people
fact,
all the
let's
time,
erase this
"Please
part.
don't use this as a model or a
right,
prototype
exactly.
for your life."
Exactly. Exactly. So anyway, we got married and he moved out to DC where I was, just because he wanted to try something different. So we did that. Um, and then we it was while we were out there that I was working for a nonprofit in downtown DC, and he was a programmer, computer programmer by trade, and so he worked from home. And we reached out to a gentleman. Well, no, so we started going to these other churches, and I reached out to one of those pastors, and just to say, because again, I was struggling to even be in church. I didn't trust myself, didn't trust pastors, didn't know how to make this work, but yet couldn't, just completely walk away from that, even though I had every reason to. And I remember talking to one of the pastors. Tony and I did. We kind of had a phone meeting, and he encouraged me just to go to counseling.
Mm.
And so he knew of a counselor nearby, near where we were, and so I started meeting with her and talking through, kind of telling her the whole story. And um, again, and she was the one that made that comment about the millstone and just how serious the Lord takes it when. And so she played a big role in kind of helping me sift through one bad counseling that I had
Sure.
received, understand what false memories were,
Mhm.
and begin to kind of see what was true.
Mm.
And even so much to the point where I was able to get to a place where I felt like I could forgive the people at the church, and just kind of let all of that go. And again, that was the Lord's working in my heart. That
Sure.
took some time and some work. While going to counseling, I there was a gentleman that went to the church. He was an older gentleman, he and his wife, that I had a good relationship. And I remember at one point talking to Tony and just being like, I'm really curious what they know, what was the church told about me leaving. So this would have been what they kicked me out in 2003. This would have been 2004, 2005, I think, probably more like 2005 when I reached out to them. And I I was just curious. And I sent him an email and I just said, "Hey, just curious to know what you all know, like, what were you told?" I didn't even know if he would respond. I had
Mm.
no idea what would happen. And he did end up responding, and he was very kind about it, and he said, basically told me he'd always wanted to hear my side of the story. But when I had left, Dean had stood at the church and told everyone that he again audibly heard the voice of the Lord. And what the Lord had told him was that I was being ministered to by some demonic spirit. And because of that, that demonic spirit was able to infiltrate the church and defile the church and all of the things that I was involved in and a part of. Some of that looked like um, those tornadoes that happened back in 2001 in Stockton. He told the church that by my leading worship, that simultaneously I was leading worship at the, this joint thing, but in the spirit realm, I was causing tornadoes to devastate Stockton.
Dean Briggs said this.
Dean Briggs said this about me to the church. Um, so that was part of how this defiling looked. He also told them that one Sunday morning while they were at church, during worship, somebody somebody got a vision that I was at the church throwing rocks at the building while they were worshiping. Either that I was there or it was a vision, something, but that was told to people that I was still trying to assault the church. Um, I was actually out of town. I wasn't even in town the date that this happened, or that this supposedly happened. I was in Kansas City. Um, and then that they were all kind of told either that he told them this or this was the culture that was going on. Everything that I had given them was tainted and was a way that the enemy was able to defile them. And so they had a all those that were my close friends had basically had a burn party where they brought all the gifts, books, CDs, letters, anything that I had given them. They brought and had a bonfire to burn them to set themselves free of me and my influence. And then the last thing was that they could not even use my name. You know, there was a little Harry Potter to this. They called me Jezebel. So anytime they talked about me, I was referred to as Jezebel. So
So
yeah, yeah. Like I
Ah,
thought what I knew was bad. What I didn't know
was
felt even
yeah,
worse,
worse.
for them. And again, I'm gone and not feeling the effects of this, but that's the effect that it had on the people that were still there,
Sure.
and that they were kind of whipped into this frenzy about this other image bearer that they couldn't even use her name and they couldn't have the things that she had given them because it somehow defiled them, and you know they needed to purge and purify their lives
talk
of
talk about
me.
manipulating through
Mhm,
fear.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
because you'll never question authority because what happened to Valarie could happen to you. And
Mhm.
if in your honesty and candor and truth, frankly, you're
Yeah.
telling your friends before everything as it's transpiring, you don't really know and you
Mhm,
trust the leadership, but you
mhm,
don't really even know what the problem is.
mhm.
So then they're all thinking, wow, we could have this too and not even know.
Yeah, yeah.
There's so many levels of just
Yeah, and I think even for the people there, it's not so much that they were worried about themselves, but it makes you think, "Oh, this must be special leadership that
right.
God spoke audibly to tell them about this to save us from this horrible
They're
person."
protecting us.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
wonderful they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Yeah.
But utter
So,
manipulation. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So
I
that
can't
was
even.
when I kind of found out what had happened behind it. And of course, I told this older gentleman, his name was Jim. And I did tell him, what I was actually told. And he had said he always kind of felt unsure and uneasy about what the story had been given. And they still went to the church, but um, I think he was just kind of a bit of a fringe person. Um, because then he was the one during this time was also when Dean's first wife, Amy, was battling cancer.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so he would tell me, he would send me emails that Dean would send out, mostly trying to keep me updated about Amy because she and I were running partners. So
Right.
Yeah.
I knew
Best friend.
them, yeah. So I knew them. They had had their two older boys by the time I had come around, but I was there for the birth of their twins and
Mhm.
very connected in their lives. And so um, he was Jim was just very kind in helping me kind of stay up to date on Amy. Um, and I know in those emails, and again, this is going to be a little bit of hearsay, but in those emails, it was a lot of Amy's passing away. If we just have enough faith, if you guys pray enough,
Yeah.
she'll be healed. She won't, she won't die. And I could see that and read that, especially now being outside of all of that, now having a bit of an outsider's perspective because I'd had some time removed from it, and my heart began to break for what pressure these people are under now. That I remember thinking this is before she passed, but I was like, but what happens if she does? Then you've
Right.
just set these people up to think that it's their fault.
Right.
Either
Exactly.
God failed. Basically, it was a setup that either God failed or they failed.
Yeah. Their
Yeah.
faith failed.
It's a
Not
lose
enough
lose.
faith. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was the dichotomy that they were set up for. And I remember just being so heartbreaking. Of course, powerless. Nobody's going to believe anything that I said, but these were still the kinds of things happening. And my understanding is from the one pastor that did stay, you know, um, because there did come a time where Dean did go before the church and admit that it wasn't an audible voice of the Lord. Now, what
Okay.
had led to that was Amy was getting really sick, and I think I don't know. I just know it was during that time she was getting really sick, and so he did admit to Amy and the other two leaders that it was not an audible voice of the Lord that he'd been hearing, that he'd led
Mhm.
them to believe for this has been years now, but that it was Tiffany in their
Okay.
counseling because they would continued. It started in counseling, and then I think it developed into just this symbiotic relationship. I think that she would go into some sort of a trance and the voice of the Lord would come through her. And
So
so,
channeling.
So
uh,
Yes.
yeah.
That's the
So,
definition of that.
again, I would extend a lot of grace to her because she went through the
Sure.
exact same counseling processes that I
sure.
did. Some of her things, and again, her stories in that arena is more extreme,
Sure.
as far as the counseling and things that people didn't know, were going on. Um, so so that's what he told people. Now, again, that's what he told people was it was through her. Nobody else is in these
Don't
sessions,
know.
so nobody else really knows what's
Mhm.
going on. She may have I'm sure she has her own version of that story.
Well, and since
So
he's been lying about everything else,
who
who
knows?
knows?
Yeah,
Who knows?
exactly. And we would give
So,
much grace to Tiffany, but with the suggestions that you were talking about with the counseling sessions and
mhm,
this idea of hearing the voice through Tiffany,
This
yeah, sounds
brainwashing
sounds a
thing.
lot like
it's
channel.
still,
Yeah.
yeah, right. And so he told he admitted this to them, and it was I don't know exactly the timeline, but sometime not long after that, Amy did pass. And after that, sorry, that still makes me sad.
It is
I,
sad.
I get sad. I didn't get to say goodbye to her. I think I told you guys I sent her a card at one point. Not I had no hope that she would ever see it, but when I knew that she was towards the end, I sent her a card from DC just trying to be like,
Mm.
I still love you and you're my friend and I know what's happening, you know. Um but anyway, so she did after she passed, I think that just was a bit of the catalyst for Dean to I don't know if he was just done. Um my thoughts are he probably was tired of the charade and heartbroken, you know, I
Sure.
grieving. Of course he was legitimately grieving,
Yeah.
you know, her loss and I think probably from that brokenness and I'm assuming the other two leaders, you know, basically he did go before the church and said this. Now, my understanding is he then put it all on Tiffany.
I see.
Right.
That it was he admitted to lying that it wasn't the audible voice of the Lord as he had indicated. It was
Mhm.
the audible voice through her. So it was her speaking. But that's not what he had been implying all along. So um,
Wow.
he admitted to that, and then pretty shortly after her passing and doing that, left town. I'm not sure where he went after that. I'm in DC at the time that this is going on.
Right.
Um, the the other so there was the worship leader guy. He and his family left, and there did remain one who was the only one who stayed, even though he was involved. He was the only one who stayed. They all stepped down from ministering. But he stayed to try to help pick up the pieces and walk alongside people. And he was who then I got more of the full story of, you know, Amy's passing and all of these events because
Mhm.
Jim, the older gentleman, had emailed me and said, "Hey, Dean just admitted to the church to lying." And so that was the first time I'd heard, and so I actually reached out to that one elder because I kinda thought, "Well, maybe maybe he'll answer now," you know, so I reached out, and that's how we kinda started communicating again, you know, about this, and, but it was when Jim told me sorry, jumping back a little bit, it was when Jim, the older gentleman, told me what Dean had told the church about
Mm.
me that I was finally just kind of set free. This shroud of unknown of there's
Mhm.
something
Yeah.
wrong with me and I just don't know what it is. When I finally heard what the rest of the story was, I was just almost instantaneously like, oh well, that's not true. I know that's not
Right.
true. You
Right.
know? And so for me in that moment was a moment of just freedom of like, okay,
Oh,
that's not true.
God.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that did,
Ugh.
you know, wonders for me as far as not being able to or just kind of feeling like this heavy weight of unknown and, you know, so, um, the rest of this, I mean, there's a lot there, but as far as I know, Dean left town. Before he left town, I think there were a few people he kinda tried to connect with. I've asked them about their you know, his apology. And they just said all he would say was, I'm sorry about everything." And then that was it. And,
Mhm.
So it wasn't like a formal disciplinary held
no,
accountable.
Yeah, and
and I
he
don't think
just
any of them were actually very, satisfied with it. They didn't feel like there was this, you know, reconciliation or this real true acknowledgement of
Sure.
it's hard to be like, "Oh, I'm sorry for everything."
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
that's hard
Kinda
to
easy.
when there is so much that has transpired, it's really hard to
Right.
navigate. and sift through all of that. And it takes more than just a blanket, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. And Valerie,
So
have you ever heard from Dean since?
I have not. I have not.
Interesting.
I've, because we now live in the world of Facebook, you
Right.
know, I have tracked him down. So I feel like the same could have been done.
Sure.
Um, I'm on social media. I'm on, um, even early then, I had emails that all of these people still knew because I still communicated with this other pastor
Mhm.
shortly after. It's changed since then, I think. But, there hasn't, to my knowledge, there hasn't been an attempt um, for any type of reaching out and dealing with this. So I did over the years kind of keep track of where he was, just kind of really out of curiosity. There was one time he was early on, he was going to speak at a conference, and I just felt this fear in me of I don't want other people to, get caught up in these things. And so I remember sending a letter, and part of it was his bio had said that he had been a part of a thriving church in Bolivar.
Right.
And I took exception to that because
Mhm.
by the time he left, that church was in shambles. I know people who have completely left the faith because of what happened.
Mm.
I know
Sad.
people like myself that walked for years in darkness and doubt and having to rebuild their faith. That to describe it as a thriving church felt insulting, really.
Absolutely.
And so, I did once send a letter and just said, "Hey, that's not true. That's not how that story is." And they reached out. Um, they didn't really reach out to ask questions, but they did reach out and responded very kindly and said, "Thank you for letting us know," and all of that. And then last I knew, I mean, they didn't do the conference. I have no idea if that had anything to do with that or if it just kind of but it was easy to see early on that he was already searching for ways to keep ministering, but now it wasn't in just some small little church in a small town. He was seeking these platforms
Yeah.
to to be heard. And I think I told you guys once I had seen that really early on when I found out he had sent, I mean, this is going to be, really early 2000s, that he had sent cassette tapes of his sermons to random churches in Ireland,
Yeah.
Okay.
to
I remember
see if they
that.
would,
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know,
Yeah.
if they would ask him to come speak or whatever. He was already kind of seeking
Right.
platform. And so I
Well, it
think
seems like he found it.
I
I
continued
think
to
it's
kind of
found it.
watch that over the years and just see that, and obviously on my end, grieving that this is
Sure.
what was happening and feeling a little powerless that you're like, I I can't do anything. And to a degree, I can't. It's the Lord's. This is the
Right.
Lord's to handle. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it spent a lot of years of trying to come to peace with that of the Lord will do as he intends to do. And um, situations like that and those things that we have to kind of trust that he is working all things out and
Yes.
entrusting him with those
Ah,
things, even though they're really, really hard, and having to entrust him with my story. And, um, until if there was ever a time, I didn't know if there would ever be a time to really to share it, to, to, put it out there. And I was okay with that. I had
right.
kind of come to, there was a part of me obviously that wanted to be heard as any, person in that situation would want to, but you do have to get to where you have to trust that it has to be the right time, the right person with the right message and the right time, so
That's exactly
Wow.
right. Well, what a story.
yeah.
Now, just briefly, because I guess we will probably have to wrap it up, but briefly tell us and tell maybe some of the ones that are listening out there right now
Right.
Mhm.
how you've gotten through this. Because what's amazing to me is from our conversations with you, you are strong. You are
Mhm.
past
Mhm.
this, and
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
maybe not 100%, but you're
Mhm.
really, really in a good
Yeah.
position. How does one get
Right.
through this?
Mhm. Mhm.
What's the, I
And
know
strength
there's
in the
not,
Lord. It's
right,
not just any kind of
there's not a
strength.
roadmap,
Mhm.
but still,
Mhm. Mhm.
how did you do that?
Yeah, that is completely the Lord's work, and I know you
Mhm.
guys know that, but
Yeah.
it has to be. I cannot state that, more. It is the Lord's work, or I can't overstate that. Um, when I left, it it kind of led for a season of just kind of some very weak faith. My husband was a new believer, so there were times that I was like, "You know what? He believes this to be true. So I'm just gonna hang on to that," or other people that I would listen to and just be like, "Okay, they believe this to be true, so I'm gonna hang on their coattails for a little bit while I'm just not sure what to think."
Right.
It was a lot. It did. So there was a season of just kind of this weak faith, and then I did go through a long season of just really severe doubt, where there was what I would say, and this wasn't the word we used back then, but it would be a deconstruction of
Right.
everything I knew to be true. Looking back now, I can see that the Lord intended that because my faith had been built on these false ideas of who God was and how He worked in the earth and how He worked in us and how we pray and how you read your Bibles. Like all of it was
Yeah.
all entangled with just these false ideas. And in order to, for me, in my experience, in order to correct all of that, there was just a complete tearing down to
Mm.
where I started with, I don't even know if any of this is true. And um, when I realized that that's where I was, I had to admit it, which was hard
Right.
as someone who'd grown up in the church, loved the church, served the church. It was really hard to admit. And I remember having this conversation with my husband and another pastor at the time, and just saying, I don't know that I believe any of this to be true. I don't know what to do with it. I've never been here before in my life. So you have to start by admitting where you are,
Hmm.
before um, I think
Mm.
you can actually begin to build on, the Lord has solid places to build on. So it started with that, and I knew at that moment too that you could do this one of two ways, and I still believe this to be true. You have those that deconstruct and want to, or even allow themselves to go through that. You can either go through with it and just deciding from the get-go, I don't want this to be true,
Hmm.
Right.
or you decide, I hope this is true. And
Yeah,
you're gonna get 2 different results.
that's true.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of that, that
Mm.
how you walk through that path of kind of having deconstructed, how you kind of get a little bit what you want on the other end of it. So, if I had wanted, thankfully, if I think, and I believe in the sovereignty of the Lord, and I probably would still be here today, but would have been a different path had I been like, I don't even want this to be true.
Right.
But it would have also given me, I would have been probably more stuck in bitterness and hurt and
Sure.
pain that I would
Right.
have had to walk through, where I went into it thinking, gosh, I hope this is real.
Right.
I hope that this is real.
Right.
But that's all I had, was a hope that
Right.
Mhm.
I wasn't, hadn't built my life on something that was false.
Mhm.
So that was kind of where that started. And I did spend a season of where I listened to every apologetic video I could find on YouTube. My heart was hurt, and so much that I knew in that world at Alliance was all so very emotion based and
Right.
very, nothing was concrete. It was all, kind of this shifting, ethereal emotion, what we hear the Lord say, all of these things. And so for a long season, I rejected all of that. even to a degree, probably shut down my heart because I didn't know how to I
Sure.
didn't know how to
Yeah.
do
That
that and or
happens. Yeah.
trust that, and decided I was gonna pursue the Lord
Mm,
intellectually. And so I watched all the videos I could until I eventually got to the point where I was like, "Okay, I've heard all the arguments, I've seen both sides. I, um and I'm mostly focused on the arguments for, or I would
Mm,
watch debates. I was very careful because I didn't want I think that this was the Lord, but I did not entertain a whole lot, of opposing, like, real
mm,
strong, like, um, other religions and things like that. And I got to the point where I was like, "Okay, either the God of the Bible is true or nothing is true." I was convinced of that. So I finally got there, that I was like, "This is the only one that's going to be true if it's true." And then eventually got to a place where I realized, and I kinda came to the Lord and I was like, "Okay, Lord, I've heard all of the arguments. I've wrestled with all of the big ideas. If I am going to now believe this to be true, it's going to be because you have changed my heart."
mm.
mm,
And I just kind of realized I'm not going to be convinced fully.
Right.
Only like intellectually only goes to a certain degree,
yeah,
Sure.
exactly. Yeah.
but emotion only goes to a certain degree. And the Bible's very clear that the heart is deceptive. And so there's just, you kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, I've done all the work that I can do.
Right.
Now the
Right.
Lord's going to have to come in and rescue me if this is going to keep going. And thankfully he did. There were seasons where I I didn't even want to believe. I wanted to let go. I wanted to have nothing to do with it. And those were the seasons that, he hung on to me. I don't always believe that faith is a choice, because I tried really hard to choose not to, if that
Right.
makes sense,
Yeah,
Does.
it
Yeah.
does.
because it was risky. It was painful.
Yeah.
I would be trusting a God that this could happen again. This could I could you're risking these things happening again, staying in the church and being with people and not understanding, believing in a sovereign God and then being like, "Okay, yeah, you're sovereign, but this happened."
Yeah. Why did
Right.
this happen?
Right.
Yeah.
What does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so you're just taking a risk and all of that. And so it took a long time for me to be able to just kind of feel like I was back on solid ground. What honestly did that for me was, in 2015, I was pregnant with, it would have been our 5th child, our 2nd son, and we lost him.
Mm,
And so it was in grieving that somehow the Lord took away this. Actually, I put it this way. Okay, so you know how you can ask questions as a believer. You can be like, "I think, I believe," and you kind of go deep, deep, deep down into yourself, and you just kind of feel this safety net that just says, "Yeah, this is true."
right.
Mhm.
That's the best way I can kind of describe it. But I've
Yeah.
talked to other people, and they all kind of can confirm that. When
Mhm.
I went through a season of what I would now say would be, the popular word is deconstructing, I didn't
Mhm.
have that. I did not have that sense. That was gone, and it was terrifying. It was kind of like you just kind of sink lower and lower and lower, and there was no safety net. And I was just like, "Oh," I there just was not this confirmation in my spirit that this was true. I didn't have that. And so, but in 2015, walking through the grief of losing our son, the Lord chose that to be what restored that safety net.
Wow.
And what's amazing to me is that in something that could have and maybe should have made me angry with the Lord
Mm,
in losing our son, that's actually what he used to restore faith in me. And I don't know why. I can't tell you why that's what did it. But that's what did it. That's what kind of restored and returned that safety net. And some of it may have been this choice to, I remember in the hospital when I really didn't want to, I turned on some worship music. I was up there by myself. Tony was at home with the other kids and just not really wanting to. And so there was probably some choices in there that I made of, I'm going to worship you in the pain. I'm going
Right.
Yeah.
to still try to seek you and find you, even though when it doesn't make any sense. And I actually kind of don't want to. And those were the moments and the seasons that the Lord kind of restored what was lost and some of the things that needed to be lost, you know.
Sure.
Um, so those were kind of the high points, but then a lot of it was this daily, I've had to learn how to study the word
Right.
in truth. I've had to learn what that means and how to really study that. I've had to learn to pray again, and that's
Yes.
still, a spiritual discipline that's still hard for me to this day because it was so abused and, misused and tangled up in so many things.
Right.
So it was just kind of this willingness to just kind of keep going and to keep walking. And my husband said to me recently, one of the things that I don't think I really realized was happening, but that it's easy to ask, Lord, why? Why did this happen? Why did you
Right.
let this happen to me? And he doesn't always give us answers.
Right.
Yep.
And Tony kind of reminded me that maybe that's the wrong question, that the right question should be, where are you in this?
Hmm.
And instead of asking why, asking, where are you? Where do I see God in
Right.
this? And so I think it's just been a lot of moments of that. And you guys, it's not been an easy journey. I'm
No.
20 years removed from it now. And just you know, most of it is really because of God's kindness and his mercy to me, to carry me along even in moments when I didn't want to. Um,
Yeah.
and then just the commitment to one, staying close to his people, staying close to the church, um, and learning the scripture for myself. And I think I told you guys before too that um, I am a firm believer in that the Lord often uses what hurts you in order to heal you. So when it was the church that did it, through church leadership, through a pastor, through Dean Briggs, it has been the church and finding a new relationship with
Wow.
pastoral authority and a new understanding of what they do and what that means. Aside from the fact I'm now married to a pastor. He wasn't a
That's
pastor when we got
There is
married.
that.
That's not the kind of relationship I mean. You don't have to marry a pastor to heal.
good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, yeah. But
Right.
he just faithfully use all of these things to kind of rebuild and to restore. And you know, the Lord the Lord loves his church. The Bible is very clear that he
Absolutely.
loves his
It's true.
church, which means that I have to love his church. And so you
Right.
somehow have to come to peace with that. And that's hard when
It
that's
is.
what's hurt you. It's really,
Absolutely.
really hard. But
Hmm.
yeah, some of the verses that I've kind of clung to, not necessarily through that, but I can kind of give me good filters looking back. Jeremiah 12:5 talks about how will you compete if you've run with men and they have wearied you, how will you
Right.
compete with
Right.
Compete with
horses?
Yeah.
horses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the idea that the Lord is strengthening and building in us that, that endurance that he intends for us to have.
Mhm.
Um, Another one that I would remind people that means a lot to me is Psalm 71:3 says, "Be to me a rock of refuge to which I may continually come, for
Yeah.
you are my salvation." And I love the reminder that we continually come. It means it isn't
Right.
just once. It's
Right.
I'm continually returning to him for that salvation. And Isaiah 12:3 says, with joy, you will draw water from the wells of salvation. And
Mm.
um, we all need that reminder that when life is painful and your faith feels incredibly dry, dead, bare, broken, you know,
Right.
he promises that we will one day draw from wells of joy. And and it's his promise to us. And we know that
Right.
scripture tells us that God keeps his promises. So
God is faithful to
yeah,
himself.
right. And my that is truly what my story is. My story
Mm.
is a story of God keeping his promise and keeping his promise to me and keeping his promise to his people and to his church.
Wow.
So
Valerie,
What an amazing story.
thank
Wow.
you.
The
Yeah.
difficulties and the valleys that you went through,
mm,
and then an ending like this is just truly amazing. So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That verse that keeps coming to mind when you were talking about the time, and I've been there, my own story
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
time where you don't want to believe because it would be just easier. And you're just
Yeah.
like, okay, God, stop convincing me. Just
Mhm.
let me
Mhm.
go. Like,
Yes.
let
Yeah.
me go. And but that thing of the verse that kept coming to mind, when you seek me with your whole heart,
Mhm.
you will
Will
find.
find me. Yeah.
And so just the fact that your emotions, your brain, all that, your intellect, that always goes, but God still gives us that seeking him in
Mhm.
his kindness. And
Mhm.
uh
Yeah.
yeah.
wow.
Wow. Well, we would love to maybe even continue talking to you
Yeah,
about
Mhm.
how you've come out of this and the new
Yeah.
things that can
right. And maybe
come from all this. But yeah, thank you so much for being with us and and trusting us with your story, even from the very
Yeah.
beginning. And
Yeah.
we so appreciate that as we're looking at these things as folks that have gone through it as well.
Right.
Not
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 like
like
you.
your story at all, but still being being lied to, being duped in some of these
Mhm.
things,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
we're coming out of that too, and
Yeah.
Right.
we're just so grateful for your story, and it's such a powerful story for those who are going through some of the same things.
Mhm.
And we can
Mhm.
talk about them theologically all day,
Right.
but this is the practical working out of your
Mhm.
faith
With
with the
fear and
Lord
trembling
over a long period
shall
of
be.
time. What a
Mhm.
But that would
beautiful
Mhm.
be
story.
something eventually we'll circle back to, but I'd love to have those conversations about when you said, I wish someone would have said something. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
what about the people that are stuck in it now? And we
Mhm.
we we don't need to go into this now, but I'd like to
Right.
circle
Right.
back and go,
Yeah.
okay, what would have helped you? Or maybe what would have, is there anything? And if
Yeah.
there is, what would it be? And
Yeah.
yeah, as
Yeah.
as a young unmarried woman trying to find the Lord and be submissive to leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one thing that we didn't really touch on that I would like to at some point is just
Okay.
how easy it is for kids, especially those who, I told you I grew up in the church.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was here. What drew me in was hearing a message of there's more. There's stuff you didn't know
Yeah.
about.
That's
There's, this whole way to read the Bible that you were never taught. And there are ways to experience the Lord that you
Yeah.
didn't know about. And for someone who really wanted to do this faith thing right, it hooks you in and makes
Absolutely.
you just be like, "Oh, well, I want I want
Yeah.
what's more."
yeah.
And when I said, they were more family to me, I have a great family
Right.
and no reason to walk away, but that's what it does is it
Yeah.
will separate you. So that just there's these patterns that I think that's what's been shocking to me is as we've been seeing all of these
Yeah.
happen on these big stages,
Oh yeah.
how
Yeah.
the exact same thing
Same
happens
pattern.
in these tiny little
Yeah.
places.
And you can see them a little bit better in the local expression with
Right.
30 people as opposed to millions that are
Right.
being affected by a platform. So
Mhm.
once
Mhm.
again,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Valerie, for doing
Yeah.
this and
Thank you,
stepping
Tony,
up. And
wherever you are in the wings, we
yeah,
know.
Tony as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
He's your IT guy.
Yes.
Right. My IT guy.
Once again, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who's watching today. And So appreciate Valerie's story as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
So thank you for watching, and God bless you. And we'll pick up this conversation a little bit more as we
Yeah.
move along.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
God bless.
Thanks, guys.